Why does a master of wine believe that a terrifying fall into a vat of wine in southern France actually was the luckiest break of her life? How can a specific wine glass shape fundamentally change the taste of a 1970s Barolo from tired to vibrant? And what is the definition of a fine wine? Well, tonight you're going to get those stories and tips and more from our guest, whom I'll introduce momentarily. But if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. I'd love to hear where you're logging in from, what's in your glass, what's the weather like. And similarly, if you're watching this on the live stream, I want to hear from you as well. I'm Natalie McLean, and I teach popular online food and wine pairing classes, and you've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. Now, I'm live streaming this for the first time, but it is based on a recorded conversation I had for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. That said, I'll be here live in the comments, so get in there. Let me know what tips and stories you're enjoying, if you have any other questions, and I'll be answering the comments in real time. All right, back to our guest. Sarah Heller, Master of Wine, is an internationally acclaimed wine expert and visual artist whose work explores the cultural history and multi-sensory experience of wine. Trained in fine art at Yale University, she creates paintings, drawings, and digital pieces, including her visual tasting notes series, which have appeared in exhibitions and publications across several continents. She is the Italian wine reviewer for Club Enologique, faculty of the Vinitaly International Academy, and wine editor for Asia Tatler. Sarah also co-hosted the series Wine Masters and Wine Masters Class and has collaborated with Lucaris Crystal on a line of hand-blown glasses. Previously, she worked in the wine trade in New York and Hong Kong, where she was executive director of Meberg Wine Media, and she recently relocated to the Pacific Northwest. She joins us now from her home in Mercer Island, Washington. Welcome, Sarah. It's so great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Natalie. Very happy to be here also. I was just as you said, what's the weather like? It's like today had to be the most Seattle day. It actually is raining quite heavily, so I
Ah,
apologize if you can hear that in the background.
well, it's on trend, or it's demonstrating great typicity, as we would say in the wine world. So I
Exactly,
guess,
true to terroir.
yeah, exactly. All right. So I alluded to this in the intro, but we often hear about people stumbling into the wine industry. That was quite like my own entry, but your entry was quite literally a fall. Can you take us back to the winery in southern France where you actually fell into a wine vat, which just sounds really scary?
Yeah, it was not great. I was an intern, and I'd been sent. I had been working for, or I'd been intern, I should say, at the wine importer in New York, and they indulged my desire to go visit a number of the wineries over the summer and try my hand at winemaking or helping out in some way. And I think to try and give me something winemaking like to do, because I'd mainly been in the tasting room, they had me hosing off barrels after doing the topping up, the ouage.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across a patch of spiders in the corner. And it was a stupid vindictive thing. They had been crawling all over me the whole time as I'd been doing the topping up, and I was just like, I'm gonna get you. So
Payback.
I aimed my hose at them, forgetting that I'd been told, do not ever step backwards in a winery. So I stepped into a manhole
Oh,
that led into one of the concrete vats. It was empty. I had not been drinking, maybe inhaling fumes, who knows? But I fell into this vat. But actually, part of the reason why I do think it is so lucky, this was the only vat in this whole winery that had had the front removed from it and was being used as a barrel storage space. And I managed to fall right between the barrels.
wow.
And so the winery, which I will not name for health and safety reasons, to be clear, they've done a lot of health and safety improvements since then. But they told somebody later that if I had fallen a foot one way in either direction, I would have been killed. So
Wow.
Yeah, so very lucky. I fractured my spine. It's totally fine now, but obviously very dramatic.
Hmm.
Poor winemaker running up and down the halls going, "Sarah, how are you
Oh,
doing?" I didn't
yeah.
swear, but he did.
Yes,
um,
yes.
and
That
as you would. And so he was running up and down, managed to find me. Luckily, as I say, because it was open, they were able to get me out,
okay.
ambulanced me over to the hospital in Avignon. So that is unfortunately the only time I've ever spent in Avignon, um, was in the hospital recovering from this. But yeah, then it was a week there. My parents immediately flew in. I had to call them.
They were in Hong Kong?
And they were in Hong Kong. It's the middle of the
Okay.
night. Called them, and they're like, later they would say, "My dad, this was the second worst phone call you can ever get in your life," because obviously
Mm,
the first worst is from somebody else telling you what's happened to
sure.
your child. But oh, my poor parents.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet.
So, I mean, they immediately made their way over to where I was. Fortunately, relatively soon, it became clear that it wasn't, I didn't have any nerve damage, could move all the fingers and toes. Luckily, I was an equestrian as a kid, so I kind of knew, you don't immediately sit up, right? When you potentially have a fracture, you just lie there
Okay. Ah, I
and try and
see.
check
Good to know.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very good to know if you ever fall into a wine bath.
Tip number one on this wine show,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, but
And
Sarah, like lesser interns would have
yeah.
like said, "That's it." What about this said, "Oh yeah, I'm all in. Let's go for it in the wine industry."
Well, I did say no on any future winemaking attempts, so there's that.
Okay.
But I don't know, it was, I think, something I had kind of really really appealed to me about the wine industry, and I think really played itself out in that scenario, was just everybody's very generous, everybody's very kind. Um People are not trying, certainly in the environment that I was in, and I can't speak to the whole wine industry, but that in that particular moment, I felt like they, I mean, I think they were a bit concerned, to be honest, because my parents are lawyers and we're all American. Everybody was there trying to make things as pleasant as possible. Everybody wanted to be helpful. I mean, it was my mistake. I shouldn't have stepped backwards. I shouldn't have tried to take out these spiders. So yeah, I didn't feel like it was an indictment of wine,
No, well,
fundamentally.
good for you. I mean, you've been through a number of challenges in your life and managed to turn them around into something positive. This is just a
Mm,
really
thank
great
you.
story and example. Absolutely. All right. So, before the accident, you had a chef bug. You wanted to cook. And so, while interning at an Italian restaurant during a semester off from school, the chef became too sick to travel to Vinitaly, which is the largest wine trade show in the world. It is really amazing. And for those of you who have not attended, even if you are consumers, let alone trade in the business, you really should attend. So, what he sent you, a 20-year-old intern, to be his representative. What was that like?
Well, luckily it didn't really involve anything much. It was that he, I think, liked to go to Vinitaly to visit suppliers who provided wine for his restaurant. But this was
Sure.
not a massive restaurant or a Michelin starred restaurant. So it was kind of his socializing, which I handily took on. So he set me up with, there was a wine producer who was sort of their closest ally, I would say, who took me under their wing and shepherded me around. But I will say one thing that was not made entirely clear to me, and probably should have been before I went, is that you're really meant to spit when you try wines.
You were not spitting at this
So
point?
no, no,
No.
there was a little bit of a macho culture around it. Like, oh no, real people don't spit. And it's like, oh, I don't know, that doesn't seem very smart. But there I was, and so by the end of the day, I mean, the people who had been assigned to take me under their wing were
They were carrying you,
decanting me into a taxi, and
decanting you
I
into
made
town.
it. I
Very
made
good.
it safely home, thank goodness. But
That
yeah,
that
I
must have
mean,
been
Vinitaly's an
overwhelming, though.
experience.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
but Vinitaly is so
yeah.
huge. What do they compare to? How many football field size? This is a huge trade show, isn't it?
It is. It's funny. I should have these stats off the top of
That's
my
okay.
head, given how long
Many
I've worked with
football
them.
fields. Yes.
But yes, yes. And just the fact that each region had its own pavilion, I just thought was so glorious. I've been reading, um, gosh, I'm gonna forget. It's Lynch and did he write it
Kermit
with
Lynch?
Bastian? No, 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 sorry. It was
Oh, no.
David
Okay.
Lynch and Joe
Oh, okay.
Bastianich, I think, who did Vino
Right.
Italiano, that
Yes,
book,
yes.
and I'd been working my way through it. And just this idea, I mean, I think I'd been vaguely aware, but the idea that each region had its own culture is just so
Hmm.
fascinating. So the idea that I could then go and immerse myself in each one in this trade fair was just a dream.
Amazing. You also have a story about your early days in Hong Kong, where you were enthusing about natural wine to an older Scottish gentleman at a wine society dinner. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Relatively quickly after arriving back in Hong Kong, I threw sort of some friends of my parents, actually a particular friend of my parents, named Charlie Smith, who has a winery in Sonoma. So just wanted to call him out. He introduced me to the Hong Kong Wine Society. Um, it was at the time, especially, I'd say mainly older people, not necessarily all old men. In fact, a healthy contingent of older women who all kind of became my wine aunties and uncles, including this man. So we were sitting together at dinner. This was one of my early wine society dinners, and chatting away. And I'd been working for this importer in New York, as I say, who were very focused on what I'd call kind of proto-natural wine at that
Mhm.
point. Like there were some natural wine producers, but it was more people who were fascinated by biodynamics. So Nicolas Joly, I had to read his book for this piece of marketing materials that I was in charge of putting together. And so it's very, I don't know that I was 100% bought into it because I still sort of had a bit of a scientific critical thinking around it, but I don't know. It was fascinating to me. And so I was talking about this probably at him more than with him, and he was nodding politely along. And then by the end of the evening, he turns to me. I don't know if I'm going to risk trying the accent. And it was just, it's been lovely to meet you, but you might want to consider getting some formal wine education instead of just spewing all this marketing BS. So
Yeah.
yeah, like, oh, it was great to meet you too. Um, but I mean, I at the time I was a little taken aback, not gonna lie. But he's Scottish. They're blunt. It's
Yes. Yes, we are.
he sorry, they. I'm actually a tiny bit Scottish, so maybe that's where it comes
Okay.
from.
Well, there you
But
go.
yeah, but
So, did he become your teacher? Your wine
he did.
teacher?
He did. He
Yes.
was my level
Okay.
3 WSET instructor, and he's a fantastic instructor. And I think precisely because of that bluntness, this this eagerness to seek out the facts and follow them to their logical conclusions, even when they're not particularly romantic, which they often are not with wine,
Right.
unfortunately.
It's important, an
Mm.
important learning point when it
It
comes to,
is.
because there's a lot of wine received wisdom out there that may, and we'll get to that. So you also work closely with the legendary Deborah Meberg. Am I pronouncing her last name correctly, by
It's
the way?
Myberg.
Myberg,
It's
thank you.
Myberg. No worries.
Myberg, Master of Wine, eventually
Mhm.
becoming executive director of the Myberg Wine Media at just 23. You've done so much so young. Despite your title, people constantly referred to you as Deborah's assistant. Can you share a story of how she went out of her way to support you, to credit you, to mentor you?
Yeah, so Deborah's amazing. And I will honestly say when I first started working with her, and it happened a couple of times, I think, as I was young girl, working for a very established sort of wine industry star, and people just assumed I was her assistant. I think that means different things in different cultures also. I don't know that I necessarily took offense because prior to being interested in food and wine, I'd actually been more interested in fashion, and I had a number of friends who were working in that industry. And I mean, the assumption is absolutely if you were a younger person working for a very senior person, you would be their assistant. There wasn't really, um, it didn't seem like a shameful thing at all. But she was incredible. She was like, no, that's not what you're doing. You're setting the agenda. You're working on the research that we're doing. You're not booking my manicures. So it was really her kind of direction to empower me and feel like, no, I could take ownership of some of the work that we were doing, which I'm really proud of to this day. And um, and then in terms of writing, I mean, she had a column for many years with the South China Morning Post, which is the main English and language newspaper in Hong Kong. And I can't remember exactly the sequence of events, but at a certain point, it's like I'm a bit wrung out. And I think anybody who writes for a living can relate to this, right?
Yes.
You get to a point where it's just what is my new column going to be about? Whereas I was 23, I think 22, 23, and was just like, oh, I have all these ideas. I want to write things. And I think in many scenarios, people would have said, cool, you write the column, we'll continue to have my masthead on it, it'll be fine. But she wrote the paper and said, I want both of us to be credited as authors on this,
Terrific.
which
Wow. That's a big
again,
step.
incredible. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, and I ended
Generous.
up getting later my own column with the South China Morning Post, which I think, yeah, wouldn't have happened had she not taken that step. So
Yeah, that's
thank you,
powerful.
Deborah.
Someone letting you in. Yeah, absolutely. And looking back at that period in Hong Kong around 2010, it was as you described it, a gold rush era for wine. What was the most absurd or maybe extravagant wine event that you've ever witnessed during those boom years? It doesn't have to be in Hong Kong, but anywhere. Um, what have you
You know,
seen?
it's funny. I feel like it's not. What industry can I compare it to without causing offense? It's not really like the spirits industry, for instance, where I think that, a lot of celebrities and a lot of show goes
Hmm.
into it necessarily. I think it's more about just the craziness of the bottles that people are bringing to things, and something about Hong Kong that I think distinguishes it certainly from the UK collector scene, which was sort of, I guess, my reference point to a certain degree. Um, is that people open their bottles, right? These are not, I mean, some people have generational collections, but most people, this was a collection they started. They can remember starting it and they want to share it with people. Um, and I think there's a lot of, there's this idea that it's all about showing off, and obviously showing off is part of it. There's no denying that. But there's also an incredible spirit of generosity,
Hmm.
right? In wanting to share these incredible treasures that you have in your cellar with everybody around you, with the people that you care about.
Yes.
Um, and so I mean, I think if I contemplate some of the events that I've been to, probably the more ridiculous, flamboyant ones are Burgundy events, right? Just
Hmm.
because of how expensive Burgundy has become. But I'll
Sure.
tell you, the people who were collecting Burgundy when I first started in wine in Hong Kong it was not a big group. It was people who really, really loved the wine. Remember the sort of the dominant mindset at that point was Bordeaux, toujours Bordeaux,
Hmm.
right? So to
Right.
be a Burgundy person, people would be like, oh, that stuff, there's nothing to it. It's watery, it's
It's
elegant,
too
as in it
light.
doesn't smell like anything.
Yeah.
I think the Burgundy thing started to happen through maybe 2015, 2016, 2017, really ramped up. But yeah, and that was when you would go to kind of Pollet-like events where people would
Hmm.
just bring these incredible, half the room was DRC. Um,
That's the event, big event, New York City and DRC Domaine
yeah,
Romanée-Conti. Yes.
yes, yes, exactly. And you would just think about the thousands and thousands of dollars that were just in the spit cups, right, or in the dump buckets,
Yeah.
right?
Wow.
And that, yeah, it's a funny one. The intersection of wine and money
It
is
is.
uncomfortable in a
And
certain
then
way.
generosity, and they all blend together. It reminds me on a lesser scale of the International Pinot Noir Festival in Oregon. You've
Mm,
probably
mhm.
been to that one, and there's a night where everybody swaps bottles at tables. It's very
Right,
informal, but
right.
the generosity of spirit there, it really
Hmm.
is like, here's my whatever, and it could be the winemaker, it could be somebody else with a different
Hmm.
bottle, and they just
Yeah,
moved around from table to table. It was wonderful. It was just amazing, and
that
there'd
is
be
the
lots
thing.
of
I think
stories.
fundamentally, right, wine bottles are that size because they're meant to be shared, right? They're not
Yes.
they're not single serve
Yeah.
packaging. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Now, you originally studied fine art at Yale University before entering the wine trade. Um, what were your primary, if I'm asking this correctly, media? Like, did you work in oils or mixed art materials, or what did you
Yeah, so
specialize in?
you had to choose a concentration. So I was a
Okay.
painting major.
Okay.
I mainly painted in acrylics. I joke that I couldn't be trusted with oils. I just they're very slow drying, and a lot of the solvents are very toxic, and I just don't trust myself to
Okay.
manage that in a responsible way. Um, and so and so acrylics. But actually, the thing about the program, the Yale Art major is quite small, and you also interact a lot with the MFA program. So I was lucky enough. The Yale MFA program in art is one of the top, I don't know, three, five in the country.
Yes.
And so I was able to take a lot of classes with those professors and also have grad students um, in class with me, which was just incredible. Um, and the final year, you really had to zero in on what you were going to do. And I'd been through this kind of journey with painting, maybe not dissimilar to what later happened with me and wine, where I started to feel bounded by the kind of the technical requirements of it, or just there's something about the problems that painting was posing that didn't sit right with me, and I felt like I
Okay.
needed to go outside. And so I ended up doing a series of classes that were totally outside of my comfort zone. So I did a sculpture class, but this was a period when sculpture at Yale, I don't know if it's still this way, but there's nobody there like chiseling marble or making bronze casts or anything. It's like sculpture is the most amorphous um, specialty or medium is not really the correct way of putting it, but so people were doing performance with objects. People were, it was very fluid, and I loved it. And so that ended up being what I did my senior year. My project was is there less controversial way to put it? It was about the idea of trophy wives,
Ah,
um,
okay.
and using somebody else's body as an expression of your prestige or as an assertion of
Wow,
yourself.
that
And
is fascinating.
it was just being sort of adjacent to New York. It was something that I saw a lot of, and I found fascinating that world. So I was spending time in environments where that was not uncommon, and so. Um, the output of that ended up being this series of masks and devices. They were very low tech, kind of by design. But the idea, there were a number of ideas at work, but one of them was about kind of the remove at which we keep ourselves from each other,
Mm,
and like the discomfort around expressing emotions
mm.
and expressing desire, um, and so there were a lot of kind of complicated masks. Um, One of them was people who basically lost the ability to emote. So there was a plastic like astronaut helmet. And it
Okay.
was just like to allow you to preserve your sort of perfect face. But then there were these things that were like almost like contact lenses that you could attach to the front that had eyebrows and kind of wrinkles etched in so that you could still emote and express. So it
Wow, what
was
an imagination you have. My goodness.
it was fun. And that probably would have been the line I'd continued to pursue had I not fallen into a vat.
Call it
My intention had always been to continue with wine, but also have my art career in parallel,
the art
which was just
career.
a little bit more challenging in Hong Kong. It wasn't the art I was making and the art that was selling in Hong Kong were just a complete misalignment. So
Sure. But you
another
still
life it could have
managed,
been.
yeah, you still managed to combine wine and art. You've said that standard wine descriptors often fail to capture the magic of the experience. Why do you believe that visual art can bridge that gap better than words like blackberry or tobacco or whatever?
Yeah, and obviously I don't want to dump on the idea of writing wine notes. I mean, the whole
Of course.
industry is sort of built on this, and
Sure.
we all do it. But it was more honestly a reaction after having finished the Master of Wine, which is
Mm,
very much a bounded problem, right? You have to accept that this is the way that things are done,
hmm.
and if you try to expand beyond that, the only person who's going to suffer from that is you. it's very directed and clear, which I think is useful, right? If you're trying to create a standardized certification.
Hmm.
But having got out on the other side of that and broken my writing style down so that it was very as objective as possible and as kind of simple and direct as possible. Say I felt broken, but I was just a bit done with it. Right? I don't want to talk about red versus black fruit. Berry. It just it had become sort of sterile
Right.
at that
Hmm.
point for
Bit
me. And
reductionist. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, and it's not that I don't think people should study that, but it was just the phase that I was in. And I
Sure.
wanted to figure out what my voice was going to be. And honestly, I wish it was something more sophisticated than this, but I wanted to have a presence on Instagram um, that was not bottle shots because I love wine and I'm not that interested in looking at other people's bottle shots. It's like, well, if people aren't interested in wine at all, they're not going to want to see my bottle shots. And I didn't want to make it mainly me on
Hmm.
camera. I just
Hmm.
that's no judgment against anybody whose work that is, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do.
Sure.
And so I was like, well, I'm sure I can come up with, obviously I'd seen Wine Follies infographics, which are awesome, and various other sort of more clear and objective, sort of demystifying wine type graphics. And I've always been a bit skeptical about this idea of demystifying wine. I think wine's mystique, right, is what's that to me is the magic, right? That
Yes, the magic. How can we,
yeah,
yeah, make it understood without dispelling the magic? That's the
exactly. How
challenge,
can
isn't it?
we still keep it? It's a little, yeah, it's the Esther Perel thing, right? You want a bit of distance between between yourself and the thing you love. Otherwise, there's no leap to make. So, um, it's like, well, if I could make images, I'm a person who makes images, right? If I could make images that were in some ways clarifying, but in other ways more intriguing, like drove people to want to learn more,
Hmm.
could that be something that would be interesting, right? And so they were very, very simple. I initially thought they would be handmade. It's doing these, I mean, really, if anybody scrolls back to the very, very beginning of my Instagram, I think some of them I've actually deleted because they're embarrassing. They were like paper cutouts and really rough, almost done with a Sharpie. Um, and it was just like the thing that stayed the same for a very long time was the overall shape and the
Okay.
overall color mood, which I
Hmm.
think is still a useful tool for thinking about wines, is that sort of those two basic things. And then beyond that, you can kind of narrow in on more specific flavors, textures, aromas. But
Hmm.
sort of nailing those, I think, will get you closer to an identity for wine if you're blind tasting to identify wine
Okay.
than individual descriptors.
Huh. We're
Um,
going to talk more about shape, yeah. But what would be an example of, like you in your visual tasting note for Domaine Clos de la Chapelle, you described a large oily body with delicate lacy skin of acidity. How do you physically render lacy skin of acidity when you're using, say, digital techniques? Like, what do the latest images or visual tasting notes look like now?
Yeah, so I think the thing that's really important for me when I'm putting together a note is not to be too literal. I've done
Okay.
that before where I've taken a picture of an oil blob. To recreate that, it could be like a picture of an oil blob and then like a certain Photoshop filter with lace on top. And that's why I think um words maybe don't get at quite what I'm trying to say, right? Because if you could just say it with words, what's the point of making the image? So it's about
Sure.
finding a shape that communicates the same sensation as the word oily, but also like the actual way that it feels, right? It's that sort of
Mm.
amorphousness, right? And a
Mm.
sort of enveloping quality. So it is complicated. It's often I'll find images and I use about 50% open source or called Creative Commons images and actually these days probably more my own images. They're often things. Mercer Island has been great because I go hiking and I find just the weirdest things. Like there's this really bizarre slime fungus that
Oh,
was growing on a log at one
okay.
point. But visually, it was glossy and it had that, so it became like an oily thing. Um,
Right.
so decontextualized, right, it was actually quite beautiful. Um, and so it is often things like that, not the literal thing, but something that in a flash reminds me of the wine. And so then a lacy thing would often be not actual lace, but maybe the leaves of my lace leaf maples, right? So there's sort of like layers of remove, but I think the idea is that it functions a little bit the way that my understanding of how cognition works, right? Is that like we have these images and we can kind of assemble them, but they're not necessarily directly tied. I think the challenge that I have with words is that they give a sense that there's certainty and
Hmm.
um, objectivity
Precision.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
precision,
Like
exactly. And I
math. Yeah.
just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, almost like math. And I just don't think the way that we sense things really functions that way.
Hmm. I
Reading
agree.
my or listening to some of the work of my now fellow MW, Janice Wang. Um, she's this incredible sensory researcher. She worked, I think now she's in Denmark, but she worked at with Professor Charles Spence,
Yes, with the
whose
music
research
and
was super, yeah, exactly.
is he at Cambridge or Oxford? One of those places.
I was trying to remember. I think it's
Yeah.
Oxford. I think it's
Yeah.
Oxford. Oh,
Yeah, he's done some
sorry if I got
really
it wrong.
amazing work on the impact
Yeah.
of sound music on wine. Yeah.
hmm
Uh-huh.
And her research that I remember saw like a webinar or something that she was doing was about tactility, right? So they were doing an experiment where they put
Hmm.
different textures, wrapping them around the stem of a wine glass, and just that sensory priming that you get basically led people
Okay.
to experience the wines differently.
So velvety, if you had a smooth whatever, you're going to find that texture in the
hmm
wine because you've been primed.
hmm
Yeah. Okay.
That
Wow.
that was the
That's
idea,
interesting.
which I just found fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much cross-modal work
hmm
being done now. Um, you teach about the concept of the shape of wine, which I just love because a lot of folks don't get into this. You often draw an outline to represent structure. Can you walk us through, say, the visual shape of a jagged, tannic young Barolo of robust northern Italian wine versus a round, say, plush Australian Shiraz?
Sure. So I think the thing I try to remind people when I'm teaching this, and it's not provisional, but it's a concept that I'm still always trying to work out. I didn't develop this as a pedagogical tool. It was originally supposed to be art, and so I think it's more about kind of getting an embodied sense of what the wine is like, rather than a one-to-one kind of graph of what happens. Loosely, the way I'd been thinking about it was that the top part of the shape would represent sort of the nose and the entry into the palate. The middle is the mid palate. The bottom is the back. So you read it from top to bottom.
Okay.
And so I think with a plush Shiraz, right, there really isn't any angularity or any sort of rigidity or hard lines until you get to the very back with Australian Shiraz, because I don't want to say all of them, but many of them are acidified, right, in order to maintain balance. And so you have that really sharp spike on the back. And it's to me a classic example of a wine with lots of tension, right? It's that real softness, lusciousness, offset by the sharpness. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
other wines, not historically Barolo, but I'd say a lot more Barolo these days, are the balance is more harmonious, right?
Okay.
There's more of an attempt at keeping everything in sort of a medium level, which to me is a little bit of a traditionalist, or it's a debate I don't necessarily want to wade into entirely, but I really admire the way that contemporary Barolo style has made itself um, more generally appealing, but I really hope that it doesn't lose its angles altogether, right? Because So Barolo, right, is like this beautiful sort of blossoming nose.
Hmm.
I'd say potentially even more so Barbaresco, which tends to have the openness earlier on. But then on the palate, there's kind of a leanness that emerges almost immediately, right? It's not a thick wine ever. So the middle is sort of maybe more, um, I think I would indicate this by having thinner lines, right? There's not as much hardness, and then on the back is when you really get this like right, the clamping down, where the sort of the prettiness of the aromatic sensations tends to hand off instead to the structural elements that really then get you on the back,
And
which again is
the
sort of a
getting you in
wine
the
of
back, is
tension.
that the bitterness or the tannins?
Mhm.
What's happening back there?
The bitterness, the tannins, and the acidity. It's sort of that
And the
synergy of
acidity.
three hard
Right.
elements that I think
Right.
really the acidity I think needs to be present on the front as well, or that cloud
Hmm.
of aromas gets really overwhelming and sort
Hmm.
of cloying, right? So,
Yes.
I mean, the other thing that I wanted with people thinking about shape is to think about wines temporally, right? I mean, I think people do generally, but more sort of more explicitly thinking about how textures, aromas, everything evolves even on the palate from the first impression to the last.
Hmm. And in the glass, and yeah, absolutely. Wine is all about time, and it's a great way to look
Mhm.
at it. And what was it about
Thank you.
Barolo and Barbaresco that drew you? Was it just, were they the first great wines you tasted? You have a special place for them in your heart.
Yeah, I mean, it probably is as simple as that, right? It's just I had not been exposed um, to particularly elevated wines growing up. My parents, they drank wine, they enjoyed it, but it was not a particular interest for them.
Hmm.
Um, and then it was when I was working or interning again at a restaurant, an Italian restaurant in Hong Kong, before I went to Piemonte. And I went to a wine fair, or the first, in fact, Hong Kong International Wine and Spirits Fair in Hong Kong. And Franco, he's the general manager, I think, of the restaurant I was working with, and he was chaperoning me, and we tasted a Barolo, and it was just this idea of like of an aroma that could evolve over time, of a texture that could be so intricate on the palate was just not something I'd considered before. I think a lot of the wine I'd been exposed to in Hong Kong was a little bit more in that Barossa Shiraz might be more elevated than what I was exposed to, right? Just not quite
Sure.
yellowtail, but the sort of more straightforwardly, purely hedonistic kind of fruit softness, alcohol. What's not to like that sort of combination? But I hadn't thought about wine as something that had this level of complexity.
Wow. Um, and you've described Nebbiolo, the grape, as sort of boggy, whereas Sangiovese, another very popular Italian grape, is not. What did you mean by boggy? I'm just curious about that.
Oh, um, I'm not sure.
Okay, maybe you didn't say
I'm
it. Maybe I
not sure.
misquoted you. That's all right. You
Oh,
could take a pass on that if that wasn't
okay.
one of the things
I
you
would love
said.
to know
Yeah,
what I was trying to say with that.
sure. Maybe that came from my deeper subconscious. Anyway, out of the bog and out of the fog here. So
Well, I mean,
you,
if I'm trying to imagine, it might have been something to do with the way that the environment sort of generates what I think is the wine style, right? There
huh?
is I mean, there's definitely kind of clay, moist soils that get very, very hard. They get very wet when it rains. And being here really does remind me of Piemonte, much more so than Tuscany, which to me is much more California. Um, Whereas Tuscany, there is, I mean, even though there are soils that have clay in them, there's an aridity to everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the
Mm-hmm.
classic soils are this kind of bone white. It's not white everywhere, I'll bet is it, but it's there's a an angularity. I don't want to say lack of generosity because it really isn't that, but the generosity comes from the sun.
Huh?
Whereas you feel like the generosity to the extent that it has it in Barolo and Barbaresco and other great wines made from Nebbiolo comes from the soil. especially when they're grown on clay soils, right? There's a compactness, a density that comes at sort of the core, that I think comes from there. Um, I really sound like I'm missing talk
No,
about
that
things this
sounds
way,
good.
but I
It
do.
sounds like you're trying to rescue my question. Actually, you're just being nice. But thank you. Yeah, that's it. That's the theory. Thank you. Um,
There we go. We did it.
now, here's something else that you probably didn't say, but maybe you once said, I think, that you want to live wine more like we live art. You're in a region known for glass art and natural beauty, being there on the West Coast. Do you ever plan to create any physical installations that might merge the two worlds?
So I would love to. I am a really bad glass blower. I did actually try. Years ago, I came and actually the project with the contact lenses on the face came out of
Yes.
a couple of weeks that I spent at Pilchuck. So at Dale Chihuly's school up north. But
Okay.
I think in terms of installations, I've talked about with a couple of friends doing site-specific work, whether that's in a winery or
Mm.
in vineyards. But the challenge is just time. Like I have two
Mm.
young
Hmm.
children, so taking the time to go be in Austria or in Italy, for the time it would take to make something I think would endure, first of all, in an outside environment would be sort of outside the limits of what I have at the moment.
Sure. Everything in its season. They won't be little for a long time. Like they do grow up
No,
quickly.
exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
let's go back to the cross-modal thing. Most people think of synesthesia as a rare neurological condition where the senses are cross-wired, i.e., tasting colors, and you're talking about shape and color when it comes to wine. Do you believe your visual tasting notes are teaching regular wine drinkers to unlock maybe a latent form of synesthesia, or I guess a new way of seeing wine? That's definitely for sure what you're doing. But is there anything there that you wanted to comment on?
Sure. So I'm not a synesthetic. I don't literally see colors when I taste things. I don't see colors when I hear notes. I think that would be an incredible experience. But I can't really speak to that experience. However, there's sort of a looser definition of synesthesia, or synesthesia, as he calls it, that Attilio Scienza, who I work with on the Vinitaly International Academy, he's our scientific director, that
Okay.
he has sort of been very adamant about, that has to do with cross-discipline thinking, right? Multidisciplinary thinking, using
Hmm.
many different modes of study to think about wine. And I have taken that so much to heart. He's an anthropologist by training, but then he's also a grapevine geneticist, and one of Italy's most prominent, and also has done a lot of geological mapping and soil mapping. He takes that sort of multivalent way of thinking into everything that he does. And so and I mean, in a way, the Master of Wine is about that as well, right? Having this 360 view on the way that wine is made, the way that it's disseminated, marketed, exists in the world. And so I think it's about using the senses more fully, and hopefully also kind of engaging our minds more fully.
Right.
I my skepticism, as I've said, around demystifying wine, I understand that it can be intimidating, right? And I realize when some of the things that I am going down rabbit holes with at the moment, because I'm in the middle of developing a painting show about the history of wine and its relationship with religiosity over the past
Terrific.
8,000 years.
Wow.
So it's I, I'm going down some rabbit holes, and it's not that I expect that the specific things that I'm reading necessarily to be it's certainly not a prerequisite for enjoying wine, and
Mhm.
certainly not something that I expect everybody to have to read. But if somebody is curious, it's just this prompt, right? And I wish we, as a wine industry, and I think Italians certainly the part of the Italian wine industry that I work with, that I'm exposed to, is much more comfortable with this idea of wine as a general cultural product, as an artifact of culture, as an
Yes.
artwork. There's not the same discomfort. Whereas I think in a lot of kind of Anglo-Saxon environments that I've been around, there's real like pushback against that. It's like, oh, it's a beverage,
Yeah.
that has its place
Drugs.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that, well, I mean, so are so many things.
That's
Um,
true. That's true. But you're
yeah,
right.
and I
In
mean,
Italy, it's part of the culture, the art. Yeah, I get that.
yeah, and the thing that I really want to stress is it's not as if these cultures don't know that wine is dangerous, right? It has that
Hmm.
potentiality, right? The
Hmm.
um so at the moment I'm reading the Metamorphoses, and it's there are a number of times that Bacchus or Liber, he's called different things, appears, and his followers, and sometimes they're doing brutal things, right? They're ripping people to shreds. There's a madness, right, that has been
Hmm.
associated with wine since its earliest days in culture, but it's also the potential for generosity and
And
redemption, and
joy.
you know,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, of all of the figures in Metamorphoses, of all the gods, I think, Bacchus is the only but one who never assaults any women. To put that out there. I mean,
Wow.
it's a very
That's
like
a
violent,
fun
dark
fact. Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, he has some dark moments, but I think there's a certain redemption in the role that Ovid sees for wine, and so I wish we could all be comfortable with the idea of wine having that meaning, right? As something that can be enjoyed
Yes.
on many levels, right?
Yes.
As
Absolutely.
just a daily
Yeah.
pleasure, and as this sort of incredible cultural artifact.
Something more if you wanted to be. I've always said you could, do a liberal arts degree with wine as the hub because the spokes
Hmm.
link to every facet of
Absolutely.
human endeavor. I mean, it really does. And
Yeah.
I know, like
Hmm.
Sarah, you probably, you can go to an art exhibition and respond in a much richer and deeper way. It doesn't, we don't have to say it's better, but I think it's certainly richer and deeper than I would. And conversely, like I was a dancer, so when I see someone do like a
Hmm.
jeté or whatever, I respond with my
Hmm.
muscles. It's like I know what it takes
Hmm.
to do that. And I think with wine,
Hmm.
that's there too. You can just enjoy it
Yeah.
hedonistically, or you can take that deep dive.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing that I think has held us up is that there are different kinds of knowledge, right? There's sort of the anthropology and the history angle, which is so much I mean, literally intimately tied to human endeavor and human labor.
Hmm.
And then there's this sort of technical aspect, and I think so much wine education leads with that, and
Right.
that is where there is a bit of a disconnect, because a lot of the
Hmm.
time people it can be a process where some of the magic goes away, right? Because you know
Yes.
now that the reason why this wine smells like the earth is not because it, lifted the earth through its roots. It's because it has it has some bread, right? It has a yeast.
Sure.
So it's yeah, I think if there is a way to communicate that information without ruining the magic entirely. That's
Hmm.
sort of what we're trying to do with the Italy
Hmm.
International Academy. That's what I'm trying to do with my work more generally. Um, but I don't know. I don't know. I also, having worked with so many different cultures, I know that it resonates in some places. Like I know that, I mean, everything that I do is sort of forged by working in Hong Kong and in China, where there is, I think, a um, a discomfort with having to study something to
Hmm.
enjoy it. That doesn't devalue it. Whereas I'm still figuring out the American environment. I arrived in Mercer Island 4 years ago now, and I haven't I haven't really immersed myself in the U.S. wine scene. I I,
Hmm.
I will readily admit. Um, but I do, just in interactions with people on a regular basis. There's a strand of thinking that, well, I shouldn't have to make this effort to enjoy something. It's either enjoyable or it isn't.
Hmm.
And I'm just not
Hmm.
sure that's true.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Yep.
as you said,
Lots
right?
of
Like
different
when
questions.
you know
Yeah.
something more about something, there's a richness to your experience that's maybe not immediately accessible.
Right. Not necessarily better, but definitely richer, deeper, which kind of leads me into the definition of a fine wine because there's so much debate, at least in the wine world, about this. Is it one that expresses terroir? Is it typical? Does it have the least human intervention and manipulation? I mean, I think you've talked about this previously where I mean, if we're going to go with that, look at Champagne, the 72 steps you need to do that, or Amarone.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
so what?
absolutely.
Where do you net out on, or is there a definition of fine wine, or is it more?
I
You
think I
can't
retreat
again
to
bring
something
it down
really
to
dry.
words.
Oh, sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
go
I think I
ahead.
retreat to something really dry. It's a wine um that can has the potential to improve over time and therefore
Mm-hmm.
is worth keeping in circulation, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, yeah, and it's so I don't know, I think because otherwise we can so readily go down a very kind of soft subjective path and get into very kind of tense discussions and real ideological positions on
Mm-hmm.
what degree of intervention is appropriate. And I think to skate past all of that, it's just its literal impact in the market, right? It's a wine that enough people have agreed, kind of like the art market, right? Enough people have agreed is going to maintain its value over time, and that has to be grounded in the fundamental wine quality, allowing it to hold together and ideally improve, at least by some metrics, over time.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that's. I think that's satisfying. Textbook for sure, but it actually avoids all these different tangles we can go down. Like, is it a single vineyard or is it a blend? And Bordeaux's a blend,
Oof.
and all the rest of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
mean, Italy is right in the middle of that discussion because
Really?
fine wine, in a way, is a concept imported from France. I might take
Okay.
some flack for saying that, but it's Italian wine. I've been spending a lot of time recently doing reading on um, particularly the history of Italian cuisine because it's
Okay.
a lot of it is surprising. It hasn't exactly unfolded the way I think national the national image has sort of developed, right? There is, yes, this idea that like Italian cuisine is extremely regional, and that is true. But on the other hand, elite Italian cuisine used to be more or less the same in all the sort of capitals because there was this kind of cross-border European elite, right? So the cooks would go, I think at one point sorry, I just find this so amusing. At one point in medieval history, the most prestigious cooks were German cooks. So do with that what you
Really?
want. Yeah,
Okay.
but so
They were traveling.
there was yeah, yeah. So
Stages.
yeah, exactly. So the concept though of wine as it has existed, this idea of a sort of tradable wine where you would, if you were in one of these elite courts, you would drink wines from all over Europe. You wouldn't necessarily be drinking your local wine. And so Italian wine as it exists today, a lot of it is what people, the sort of the normal people, the common people had
Right.
that they were growing for their own consumption. And so trying to figure out which of these grapes, how they fit into this model. That I mean, if we just kind of think about the way that wines are typically made for fine wine consumption, kind of fine wine positioning in France, right? Historically, they would have been aged in oak barrels of various sizes, but generally on a relatively small scale, with a fair amount of new French oak. I'm not talking about like 500 years ago. I'm not talking about in relatively recent. Let's say since the classification of Bordeaux, say.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
1855.
whereas, yeah, whereas Italian wine in that period, there are some exceptions, right? Chianti was elevated by the Medici family as a as a potential export product from Tuscany. And I think there were some efforts to send it to Great Britain, which is sort of like the arbiter of fine wine taste,
Mm.
much more so than the French, right? Because they were responsible for the trade of wine
All the
along with
trade,
the
the
Dutch.
international. Yes.
Exactly. Um, but Italian wine was really not part of that trade in any major way, other than Marsala, which was effectively a British imposition on a wine culture that was pre-existing, but was not sort of as systematized prior to the arrival of the English. So it's now trying to figure out how these wines fit into the fine wine scheme. This is why you have so much experimentation in Italy, because people are
Right.
trying to figure out how much the traditional methods versus kind of imported methods make sense for their grape varieties.
Hmm. And tradition can't even dictate that. Even in Italy, with its, centuries old winemaking tradition, you have relative upstarts like, Sassicaia or whatever, Tignanello, that rewrite the rules and become fine wines. So it's not like they had, you
Absolutely.
know, so everything gets turned on its head. It's interesting for those who like to debate it.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. Okay, so the Master of Wine tasting exam has a pass rate of less
Mm.
than 10%, as you are aware. Um, can you describe like the mental gymnastics you performed during the exam to identify wines without, say, leaping to conclusions, and how you were successful, why you think you were able to get through such an arduous exam?
I think it's very hard because we think of wine so instinctively, right? And as a sensory experience, in reality, right, as I was sort of alluding to before, all of our sensory cues blend together. So actually, the really analytical approach that we take in standardized wine tasting is a bit of a leap of the imagination, to be honest, right? But it's if you sort of accept that and you say, well, I need to make a conscious effort to block myself off from making synthetic conclusions, right? Bringing information together. I'm just going to focus on getting down the information without trying to form a conclusion. Then I think that's sort of as close as you can get to turning yourself into a precise sensory instrument. Then you go back almost with a clean mind, right? But again, it is this work of mental gymnastics, and look at the information that you've assembled and then think about logically what is this pattern, right? Then it becomes about pattern recognition. And then there's a third stage where it's about communicating that information as convincingly as possible. So it is
Hmm.
really three very different cognitive exercises. And so I tried to, so geeky, I tried to focus on doing those separately. So I would literally, while I was training, practice those separately. I would have times when I was just doing the tasting and note taking, and times when I'd have an imagined grid. So I'd write down information and then try and synthesize that into what my conclusions would be, and just arrange everything in sort of blocks. Like logically, this plus this means that. And then separately, I would work on writing my prose, making sure that it was convincing. And I think it's that
Wow.
there's a chess grandmaster, then like jujitsu champion, Josh Waitzkin, who
Hmm.
wrote a book. Of course, the title is escaping me right now. Anyway, Josh Waitzkin, I think he's only written one book, but it was the concept of smaller and smaller circles and sort of identifying smaller and smaller units. I think you can relate to this as a dancer, right? If you try to
Hmm.
learn a dance immediately, right, by just watching it, it's like everything seems insane. But
Yes.
if you nail down each individual step,
Components. Yes.
get those and then string them together, then you can do it faster and faster and faster, because that is another factor, is the time in the Master of Wine. It's time constrained. And so I tell
Right.
people
Right.
that if you're struggling with time, don't just practice doing the whole thing again. You're not going to get faster. The only way you're going to get faster is by breaking apart the entire process and then doing a diagnosis basically of where your weaknesses are, and then you can compress it.
Wow. Um, You also mentioned that judging a wine too quickly is dangerous because structure rarely lies. Can you share a detective story where the structure of a blind wine saved you from making the wrong guess?
So I don't have one where it saved me. I have one where I wish it had saved me.
Oh,
Um,
okay. That's equally good.
so it was my first year assessment for the Master of Wine exam, which is basically what you do after your first year in order to allow you to progress to the second year, which is the quote real exams. But it's supposed to be a compressed version of the full exams. And so we had 12 wines, which is one paper effectively, and then two essays, I think. It's years ago now. And the I had just been in Piemonte for about a month before this. I was interning at a winery, I was doing various things. And then the wines, spoiler, were three wines from Piemonte. They were Barolo, Barbera, and Dolcetto, which in retrospect should have been really obvious by the logic of the question. It was one region, three different single variety wines. There are not that many regions that could be. But instinctively, I smelled it and I was just like, "Whoa, this smells Spanish to me." They were kind of oxidative in style, and I was getting a fair amount of oak. It almost smelled like American oak. So immediately, that Barolo to me was Rioja. And then where do you go from there, right? Is like, is this going to
Right.
be Graciano? Like what? But so I don't remember what nonsense I wrote. That page was just scrolled, 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 scrolled. But if I had taken a moment and tried to suppress my sense of smell, literally, and tasted the structure, it's very hard to confuse Barolo tannins for Tempranillo tannins after they've been oxidized out by new oak
How do
and
they feel or
oxidative oak
taste?
aging.
Yeah.
So the thing I say about Nebbiolo tannins, when Nebbiolo comes from the Langhe, basically where the clay-rich soils are, is that they feel contiguous on your palate. It's almost like your palate's being shrink wrapped, right? It's every surface of the mouth, but then there's no discernible individual grains, right? So it's just like whereas Sangiovese goes like a stripe down the middle of your tongue and it's discernibly grainy. That's where I think this idea of dustiness, if it has any sort of objective basis, I think that's where that comes
Interesting.
from.
Okay.
Um, Rioja, right, because it is exposed to so much oxygen, right, through the and not like a deliberate matterization or anything, but just compared to wines that are typically aged in a botte, um, there's a sort of rounded a foldingness to the tannins that if I'm making an image, it would have a lot of curlicues like this. Um,
Okay.
and so I think it's very difficult one if you know what to look for, if you are suppressing your sense of smell and just focusing on the texture to
Oh,
confuse those two textures.
okay. That's really fascinating. That's great. I'm going to try that this weekend.
Please do. Sounds like a fun
Yeah.
experiment.
Um, so you have an Elements glass collection with, is it Lucaris?
It's
Is
Lucarus.
Lucaris? Okay, there we
It's
go.
a made-up word, so
Lucaris. Okay,
but
Lucaris.
Lucarus, yeah.
I find this fascinating. You use concepts like fire, water, and air instead of grape varieties. Why did you decide that, say, a Cabernet glass is less useful than a fire glass? What do those concepts mean when it comes to tasting wine?
Yeah, so this arose out of the fact, Lucarus, I'd done a little bit of work with them before I got the Master of Wine, but they were the first call the moment I got the Master of Wine. Like, we want to produce a collaborative collection. Do you have any amazing ideas? Like, well, just off the top of my head. Um, but I went away and I knew that as a company, Lugaris is a brand of Ocean Glass, which is a huge producer of soda lime glassware. So, this sort of thing, not this specific glass, but this kind of thing. And they're based in Thailand. Um, and they had developed Lucaris as a machine blown crystal glassware brand for wine glasses. Now they've expanded into spirits glasses and things, but the idea was always to have a sort of Asian spin, which at the time seemed like something kind of applicable to myself. It was fun. I was in Asia, and there was so much curiosity, excuse me, around that at the time around Asian food and wine pairing, for instance.
Hmm.
And so that was one idea they threw out at me. What if we could find something that related in some way to food and wine? Like, okay. Went away and had a think. And something that's always been interesting to me is this sort of binding together of cultures, right? Especially across the Eurasian continent. And I mean, I think that, sort of extends, right, because of historical immigration patterns and things. But what are things that are shared in the philosophical background of these two cultures? And the
Hmm.
thing that was a linkage was this idea of the natural elements, right? That was kind of predated our modern scientific understanding of what an element is. Um, and I was really interested by how there were the four, I think, in ancient Greek philosophy. I'm going to get this wrong. There are five in Ayurveda and
Is this
six in traditional Chinese medicine, or the other way around.
elements or
Uh,
chakras or elements?
Elements. So
Okay.
air. Um, Ayurveda has ether. We
Okay.
didn't make an ether glass. But
Well,
that
you
was
could
that was
say you
sort of
did, you just can't see it.
yes, exactly. It's ethereal. But we came down on the idea of originally we were going to do four. And then we thought that maybe that was not ideal, given four is not a lucky number in Chinese kind of ideas around auspicious numbers. And so we
Okay.
did five. And so then we had to decide which ones they were going to be. And so I think fire, air, water were the pretty obvious ones. And then was it going to be wood? Like, oh well, a wood glass for wine, maybe for a bourbon glass. I don't know. Um, but so the whole idea though was kind of around balancing and individual sort of composition or identification or preferences. So the idea was that the glasses would shape the wine to be the thing that you needed it to be, rather than presenting the wine in its ideal form, right? Because I'd come across a lot of glasses were positioning themselves as universal glasses, right? And this
Hmm.
is, I think, pretty standard idea, and that one glass can be the ideal glass for everything and every wine and every person. But I just don't think that's fundamentally true, right? Some of us prefer rounder wines, some of us prefer fresher wines. And then over time, that sort of evolved, right? I realized people don't necessarily, it's not that the glasses made the wines all taste the same,
Hmm.
but they drew out that particular element in the wine. So the water glass made the wine fresher and more precise. The air glass emphasized the aromatic profile while still keeping it fresh, so that it didn't feel kind of cloying, as I was talking about with the Nebbiolo earlier. And they went through a lot of iterations. It was a 3-year process getting from that initial conversation around why don't we do something about the elements to actually having the glasses. And of course, we released them in 2020,
Mm.
right as the
The
pandemic was
pandemic.
starting. So that was fun. But
Wow.
anyway, so it's not that I disavow. I think people, if people want to have a Cabernet glass and that feels like they want the sort of reassurance of being told this is the best way to experience this wine, this is the most authentic way to experience the wine,
Hmm.
that's totally fine. But my idea, certainly at the time, and I think I still believe this to be true, is that there are people who can sort of take ownership of what they enjoy in wines, and we can all be sitting in a room, have different preferences, drinking the same wine, and we're getting completely personalized experiences. So that
Yes,
was that was sort of the thinking behind.
I get that. So what does the fire glass do to Cabernet? Make it more? I don't know, volatile. What's it doing?
It does actually. So because it is a wide flat base, it does like you're getting more alcohol release, and that's bringing like a huge cloud of aromatic intensity. But
Okay.
you are also getting this sense of heat. And then it's a wider rim than a lot of the others. So you get this simultaneity. Everything lands on the palate at once. So there's this sense of potency. Um,
Okay.
all of them, it's a combination of I mean, the original prototypes, I'll tell you, were like very simple. It was just about the ratio of what I call the hips, right? The widest part of the bowl to the rim.
Okay.
Um, and the the design team and the marketing team were like, "Do you think we could do something a little bit more interesting?" Because they were just all sort of variations on tulip glasses with different widths and rims. And so we went really baroque. I mean, at one point we had like a glass that was asymmetrical to be the air glass. It was gonna be like a cloud puff. I don't think we would have sold many of those, but maybe we would have. Um, and it was fun, and then we pulled back from there.
Okay.
So it's a combination of the dimensions of different things, but then also some of them have like the air glass now has almost like a donut around the middle. So it's just this like very rounded, soft surface in which you can do the aeration. And it
Okay.
like, I mean, there's a lot of kind of fluid dynamics that you can get into, right? It's like because it's more rounded, it's a gentler oxygenation than if it were hitting like in the fire glass, it's hitting against a hard wall, but then there's this sort of rippled base at the bottom that keeps it a little bit more stable.
Okay.
So there was a lot of kind of later detail that we put into it, but the basic concept is around how we can draw out particular facets in different wines.
That's interesting. That's great. And are they still on the market? Have they done well as glassware?
Well, so they the decision we came to the glassware company, as I said, do machine blown glasses. Um, but the problem with machine blown is that once you decide on a shape, you have to commit to making 120,000 pieces. Um, and given the sort of unusual shapes we were doing, we all had severe anxiety around that. So we decided to go with hand blown, um, which meant that we they couldn't do it in Thailand. So we ended up blowing them in Hungary. But so they were really limited production runs. And as I say, we started in the middle of the pandemic, so we were
Mm.
doing like 1,000 piece production runs. And then I think there are still some in stock, but it became quite challenging working with that factory. Now,
Sure.
the company at the moment is thinking about doing a limited range machine blown.
Huh?
Um, but yeah, we can't kind of get into more detail at the
No,
moment.
that's fine. Yeah, no. Corporate secrets. It's fascinating. Fascinating. I'll have to Google that
Thank you.
afterwards and take a look at what they look like.
Thank you.
Our time has flown, Sarah. I haven't got through nearly all of these questions, but is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the thing I have really come to appreciate in the work that I've been able to do around wine, particularly with Vin Italy International Academy, with working with people. I mean, the way that the program is structured, our main program is every year in April, we invite 60 people from around the world, or they apply, but we end up with about 60 people from all over the world. And it's really part of it is the quality of the students, but also it's dictated by which markets the fair and by extension the Italian trade agency wants to focus on. And so we've had different areas of focus over time. Originally, it was there's a heavy emphasis on China. There's been more of an emphasis on North America in the past couple of years, but also there's a big Central Asian contingent. We actually did a session in Kazakhstan at one point,
Wow.
and I think it's important to understand that the kind of dissemination of wine knowledge is not a one-way street. I think
Hmm.
there's a degree to which um, there's a current of thought that it's just about culture going in one direction, but to me, it's very bidirectional, right? The amount of impact that I've seen with the sort of wine boom in Asia coming back and shaping the wine industry. It's this wonderful dynamic industry that's able to welcome people in. And I think we see this with the incredible winemaking that's happening in China, how it's sort of going beyond now being what it was, I think, in the early days, which was trying to follow a Bordeaux model. Now it's sort of gone in all kinds of fascinating directions. And so I want to emphasize, I guess, wine's role as a connector that truly is both ways. Um, and I love that about
True.
it.
Absolutely. And we should say just a few more things about the Vinitaly faculty. You're part of that. And so, do you do online classes as well, or is it the once a year by invitation only, 60 people? How does that work?
So that's the main course. So this is
Okay.
there's the Vinitaly International Academy, and then there's the Ambassador Program. I'm the faculty for the Academy in general, but I'm also the lead instructor for the Ambassador Program, and that's sort of the pinnacle of our pyramid. But there's also there are different tiers. They've just gone through a revision of the sort of feeder tier for that, so that's sort of in the process of being rolled out. But our core program, as I say, is a 60 person program in Verona, and typically we do 2 to 3 satellite editions over the course of the year. So the past couple of years we've done 2 in the US and 1 somewhere else. This year we have one in New York in October, but we're still deciding what the others are going to look like. I've been pushing for Asia just so I can justify going home. But
Sure.
you know, we'll see what happens.
That's great. And where can people find you, Vinitaly, the school, everything online?
Mm. Thanks. So my Instagram, where I still occasionally post some of my art, although it's probably going to get its own account relatively soon, is
Okay.
at Sarah Heller MW. And then my website is sarahheller.com. Vinitaly International Academy is part of the Vinitaly website. So if you just Google Vinitaly International Academy, it'll pop up and show you the dates of the next programs. So yeah, look,
Perfect.
hope to see some of your listeners at one of those programs. It's truly it's one of my sort of very dear to me projects. Really
That's
different,
great. I'm sure you will. The responses we've had to previous podcasts, people are very engaged. So we'll put all the links in the show
wonderful.
notes in case people have missed writing that down. Sarah, don't log off, but I will say thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation.
Thank you,
Really
Natalie.
enjoyed it. Um,
Likewise.
and cheers to you. Good luck with everything you're doing. I can't believe how you. I don't know how you do it, and you have 2 young children. So, holy smokes, you have a schedule that would tire a horse. But but
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well,
Thank
I
you.
hope next time,
You're
Sarah, we
wonderful.
can chat over a glass of wine in person.
That would be great. I would love that.
All right. Cheers. All right.